the idea of that piece that I wrote, I mean, I was planning on going and doing some like hard reporting on what was going on. And within 2 days, specifically in Hebron, I was so overwhelmed by the sheer pervasiveness of the brutality and the cruelty that I was witnessing from soldiers and from settlers that I just lost the plot. And I was like, I don't even know what the story is here, except to say that this is insane. And, you know, it's kind of a trope at this point, like Westerner goes to the West Bank and like, oh my God, finally, you know, he's shocked and people want to listen now. And like, I recognize I stepped right into that trope, but I just, the soldiers who walk around like in Hebron, where the Palestinian village is literally just like, or the Palestinian city is like surrounded by settlements. The soldiers walk around like fucking stormtroopers.
I mean, like Jasper, in your writing, I mean, what struck me so much is like, you know, like this is like a lower intensity than Gaza. But what really struck me about it was like the intimate daily, and now this has been going on for decades, the intimate daily, like intimate acts of sadism and cruelty that like could just be like as simple as like threatening a man on crutches to go back inside.
Yeah, that was so shocking for some. I mean, I was in a bakery, and the bakery owner had broken his leg somehow. And so he was on crutches, and he just had these like trays full of baklava and these like delicious treats, but the economy had basically shut down and nobody was really buying them. And he just was like, have whatever you want. And he wouldn't take my money. So I just sat there, was like drinking coffee, eating baklava with a fixer, and soldiers just walk in. It's like just a quiet, I don't remember what day of the week it was, but there's absolutely nothing going on. Two soldiers just walk in they walk to the door. The owner had been standing by the door, the guy in the crutches, and they just shout something at him in Arabic. And he like immediately sort of runs inside, and the soldiers then leave. And I asked my fixer, like, what did they say? And he's like, oh, they told him, get inside or I'll break your other leg. It's like, what? And I was like, I think I said, why? Why would they say that to him? And he laughed. He's like, what do you mean, why? This is how they treat us. Everywhere you look, they are just bullying people. You know, I saw soldiers pushing elderly people to the ground. I mean, I had guns pointed at me just because I was with Palestinians. I mean, they're so just like charged up and just drunk with power. And I think, you know, in the months after October 7th, like really feeling like they were the saviors, that it's just cruelty everywhere you look, basically.
You've seen it in a lot of accounts of the West Bank, both sort of before this closer partnership between the military and the settlers. But it you know, accounts of settlers spitting on elderly people, they particularly target like elderly and disabled people like so often. It's just, these groups of like youth just ganging up on one, 72-year-old like that.
It's the kind of thing where if you saw that happen, like, oh my God, I just watched two cops push an elderly person to the ground.
Yeah.
It would change. It would shock you to your core. And it just happens everywhere you look over there.
Yeah. And before sort of this iteration of it, it was already like, the Jim Crow South. It was already like every day in Mississippi during Jim Crow. But now what you've described now is like, it's like if the plot of Mississippi Burning was that they sent troops and federal agents down there to help the people that were doing the lynching. Like that's basically it.
To personally back up Michael Rooker's character.
That's basically it. I mean, that's kind of spot on because, as you said, I mean, what they did is like the settlement movement was already there and active, and the military was already there. They just like literally threw a sort of bureaucratic switch. It was like, okay, suddenly the military is now directly part of the same settlement movement. And so, I mean, it really was basically everything that was already happening. The dials were just turned way up.
But like for your sources, the people, like your fixers, the people that like are your contacts there, like what can you tell us about just what daily life is like in the occupied West Bank for Palestinians living under this occupation?
Yeah, I mean, it's different all over the West Bank. Of course, like there are some like Bethlehem, which is a sort of a little bit wealthier, mostly Christian. Like they're still getting harassed, but it's not nearly as bad as it is in some other places. But like I'll tell you about a couple examples. So I think that Sebastia is a really good sort of proxy for understanding everything in the West Bank. So this is the town in the northern West Bank. It's home to, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 people. I'm forgetting the exact number. And because the town itself is built around what the settlers consider the ancient city of Samaria, which was the capital of the northern kingdom of ancient Israel back in the day, basically, like, the settlers want this place more than they want a lot of other places. Like, they want everything, but this place is really special. And so what is happening is basically, number one, because of the laws that I mentioned that have allowed Israel to basically take over everything happening in Area B, the municipality can't do anything anymore. They can't run the most basic civic functions. I mean, they get their water from a mountain stream. They have a whole elaborate system. They can't access that anymore. They had a whole irrigation system that they built with money that they had raised from international funds. The military came in and literally just poured cement in it. They don't let the garbage trucks out, so there's just piles of garbage everywhere. When I was interviewing the mayor of the town, literally the day before, there was a huge storm predicted. And so he sent out a bulldozer driver to basically clear the water channels of debris so they wouldn't overflow. While he was doing it, soldiers came into town, arrested the bulldozer driver, took the bulldozer away. And so the town flooded because this guy just was not able to do his basic job. The things that happen in every town and city are just not able to happen anymore. So on that level, there's this municipal sabotage, which is happening all over the West Bank, to be clear. But it's really like shutting life down. They also can't leave anymore. I mean, Sebastia was actually one of the top tourist towns within the West Bank. I mean, people would come from all over to see these beautiful ruins, and they had a really thriving tourism industry. They had these beautiful gift shops, and now just nobody can go anywhere. I mean, I think everybody knows about the checkpoints, but like, I remember when I was leaving, I was going from Sebastia to a settlement, actually, which was about 600 meters away. And to be able to get there by car, I remember watching the little dot on Google Maps just going in the opposite direction for about 2 hours. And I was just like, and the driver was like, I'm sorry, there's no other way. I mean, it took about 3-4 hours just to get 600 meters. So they can't get anywhere. Another like little example of how this affects people, my fixer and now my friend Zaid, his dad has diabetes. And because of his diabetes, he has this condition where I forget what it's called, but basically like there's pressure on his eyes. And he was seeing an eye specialist in Ramallah who'd been treating him for years. He can no longer get to that doctor. The soldiers have not let him. There's no specialist that he can get to. So he's going to go blind, basically. This is like a 50-something-year-old man who's just, there's absolutely no reason for it. He's a doctor too, by the way. He's just going to go blind now. So that's, I think, one side of it. I should also mention that right now, Smotrich is refusing to give the PA almost $1 billion in tax revenue that they're owed. And this is money that, like Palestinian workers in Israel, paid towards all different types of taxes that the Palestinian people paid into. And he's just like, no, we're actually just not going to give it to you. So they're not able to pay a lot of the municipal workers. Unemployment is just skyrocketing. And then I would say the last thing is there is just like constant threat of violence in a lot of places. So in Sebastia, I was there, my last trip there, I was there for like 5 days. Every single day, the soldiers would come into town. They would just menace people. They would get out of their cars and point their guns. On one of the days, they shot somebody in the leg, crippled him for life. And then they leave. And then actually right after I published that story in The Drift, the cousin of a guy who I had met there who had been shot in the leg. So I met like a 17-year-old who had been shot in the leg in January, and he couldn't sit. And right before my story came out, his cousin was shot dead. So it's like people are just being shot dead constantly by soldiers. This kid was 14 years old. A sniper shot him from like 300 meters away. And by the way, the IDF, their comment was he was throwing stones. So this kid was, apparently had like fucking John Elway times 100 arm strength to be able to do that. So yeah. Basically, it's like the shutdown of municipal life. They're not able to travel. A lot of people used to go into Israel to work. They can't go in anymore. They're not getting paid. And now there's just this constant threat of violence. And in some places like Masriyata and like Sinjil, they're getting chased off their land.
Well, I mean, like this goes back to what I said. Like, I mean, whether it's Gaza or the West Bank, the focus is the same, because what you're describing here is maybe not like the wholesale slaughter that we're seeing in Gaza, where they're totally unrestrained and have just destroyed every building, kill anyone that they see, bomb schools, hospitals, refugee tent camps. They can just do a wholesale extermination there. But what you're describing in the West Bank is like the same, a lower intensity version of the same ultimate strategy, which is to make life impossible, like in the most literal sense.
100%. I mean, it's a slow motion ethnic cleansing. And I should say, though, that there are places in the West Bank like Jenin and Tulkarm, which, I mean, they're not like carpet bombing it the way that they did in, Rafah or parts of Gaza, but they've basically destroyed everything. They've just displaced, I think, like 40,000 people. But that's true what you say, Will. I mean, first of all, they can't carpet bomb the West Bank because there's a lot of Jews there, and they, ideally don't want to kill all of them. And there are laws that, they nominally have to adhere to, these international laws around the occupation. And so what they're doing, like you say, is they're strangling it. They're strangling the West Bank, and they're hoping people will leave. And in fact, the Smotrich has this plan where he says, we have the money and we will pay you to leave. They want to pay Palestinians to leave and go into Jordan. And if they won't do that, and if they won't accept that they are colonial subjects, then they'll have to fight to the death and kill them. So one way or another, the settlement movement, which is completely in control of Israel, plans on taking over the West Bank, getting everybody out, or, treating them as colonial subjects.
I mean, it does give me an idea for what our government should do about the West Bank and the settlement, which is I think we should start paying them to leave as well. And go back to this country. I mean, as much as I don't want them here, it would be preferable to me.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, we kind of owe that to the world to kind of absorb these people.
I was thinking that, like, they sort of have, it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy that they have nowhere else to go because they're so just wretched and awful that it's like, yeah, we absolutely don't want them. But yeah, I mean, like, as you say, well, I mean, a lot of these settlers are American or Russian, or when I spent a day in the settlements, my tour guide was like a hipster from the Netherlands, and she had a nose piercing, and she was like a hippie, and she did yoga, and she was cool. And then she would casually she actually just said while we were driving, there was like a Palestinian person on the side of the road, and she was like, I have to sometimes stop myself from just swerving and running them over. And
Jesus Christ! I mean, like, well, Jasper, like when you said, like, when you went from the West Bank into one of these settlements, and it took like 4 hours, and you talk to these settlers, like, do the things they say to you, do they just assume that you agree with them, or like, I mean, just who are these people? Like, what are they like, and how do they justify what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, they're mostly, they say these things because they're proud of them. And that's why I think that it is sort of like the settlement movement represents the heart of Zionism, because pretty much all of what they're saying, they're like, just borrowing from the early Zionists who, just staked a claim to the land because of the Old Testament. The settlers are right, actually. Like Jerusalem and parts of the West Bank, based on the Old Testament, is more the sort of cradle of the Jewish civilization than Tel Aviv or, Haifa. But like, that doesn't mean they get to keep it. But because Israel was founded on this idea that we have this historical connection, the settlers are just like, look, you guys did it over there. We have a much stronger claim to it over here. So they're very open about it. And I mean, I don't want to like generalize the settlers, because you got the hippie types like I described. You have like the just absolute filthy, like children, and they're the people who live in the hills. The hills have eyes.
The feral urchins,
yeah. And then you have like the people like Daniela Weiss, who are really like sort of adamant and ideological in the way they talk. But I will say this: every single one of them that I talked to, I probably met 15 settlers across 3 different settlements, ranging from like the elderly to kids. Every single one of them agreed, like, we have to get the Palestinians out at all costs. I mean, there was no question. And they're like, the idea of coexistence was a non-starter. And, of course, they frame everything as like they're terrorists who want to kill us. So like when I had that encounter in Sebastian that I mentioned, where these soldiers came out and pointed guns at me, that was a day before I went to the settlement. And I talked to some settlers, and I said, let me tell you this thing that happened. I was in this town. It was completely quiet. I was talking to 2 sweaty teenagers who had just gone on a run. There was nothing going on whatsoever. I'd been there for a week. I know there was nothing nefarious happening. And I explained to them, these soldiers just came in like completely belligerent, out of control, pointed their guns, then shot somebody actually the next day. And they, like, without missing a beat, they were like, you are so naive to not realize they were planning an attack. It's just like, okay, all right. I guess, that's what you think.
I mean, like, I assume that is bullshit, but like, I mean, somebody has to plan to fight back. And when I see this footage of like these absolute wretches just like burning people's fields or just taking their homes or just pushing them around on their own streets or in their own homes, I just think of like, where is the Second Amendment solution for the West Bank? Like, I mean, I know we're arming all the settlers in the West Bank, but like, could anyone get these people guns or something?
Yeah,
because I'm thinking like they need to stand their ground. Like that would be the first thought in my head. But I realize, I'm not getting pushed around the same way, and I don't want to die.
Right. I mean, I'm not saying this to, demand people risk their lives from the comfort of America. Like, neither of us are saying that, but it is just like, unless you are like the most devout Quaker, when you see this stuff, you want to just deliver truckloads of guns to these people.
Yeah. I mean, you're describing like one of the sort of central just impossibilities of being a Palestinian in the West Bank, which is that if they fight back, they will be killed, full stop. Like, they will die. And some of them reach a point where they are willing to die for the cause. And I think that, militancy is growing. It's mostly in the cities and the refugee camps, but like, I hear that you're seeing it sort of seated outside of there, which makes perfect sense. But like, just to give you an example, there's a town called Buren, which is right by Yitzhar, which is like known as one of the most extremist settlements. It's where a lot of the Hilltop youth come from. This guy literally lives like on the bottom of the hill that the settlers live on top of. He has had to build a fortress around his house, like a literal fortress, because every single day they come in and they throw rocks and they basically, they fire shots at the house and they try to kill them. And I asked him, like, have you thought about fighting back? And he basically said, I'm not a fighter. I don't know how to fight. Like, I'm a fucking farmer. And so like a lot of these people are just, they're not fighters. They have literally no experience with firearms. And so like, I do think absolutely, actually Ben Ehrenreich had a great piece about this in Harper's a couple months ago about how like more and more people are saying, I guess we have no choice but to fight. But for the most part, I mean, we're talking about people who have never fought. They're just like, that's not who they are. They're farmers and they're peaceful people. And so the idea of like picking up weapons is not, in the cards for them. But what they do say is they'll never leave. They will never, ever leave. And they will get killed and they will get run over by bulldozers and tractors before they leave their land.
I mean, I will just say this, that outside of a few instances, just no one's like a born fighter. Hezbollah, obviously, it rose out of communities in South Lebanon that, while not totally comparable in composition and class makeup, if you went back to like the 1960s, people wouldn't necessarily think that those were born fighters. And I always think of that video of the Qassam fighters, where they talk about what they wanted to do when they were younger. I always think about that guy talking about how he really wanted to be a gym teacher because he loved exercise and he wanted to teach young people how to exercise, but he just felt like he needed to do this. And we're against any type of prognostication. And I think it's particularly grim to make prognostications here, like you're betting on a sports game. But eventually, if you just kill people and brutalize them and humiliate them no matter what, and just say after the fact, oh, they were planning attack, they were going to kill us, eventually it will become like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I think that's true. I mean, I my guess is as good as yours. I think we are going to see more probably armed resistance coming from Palestinian villages where there has not been. I will just say that my sort of visceral experience in going to a lot of these places was like, there's absolutely no chance these people are going to pick up arms because it's like, they just don't seem that way. But I could be totally wrong. And Felix, you're right. Like, they are being pushed to a point where it's either like, actually, there's a great quote in that Harper's article I mentioned where somebody is like, well, I'm going to die either way. I might as well go out fighting. And so I do think that people are definitely coming to that conclusion.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those quotes where you look at it and you're like, damn, why I wish Pat Buchanan hadn't said this, because it's pretty good. But he said in like 2009 regarding Grapes of Wrath, that those little boys who saw their sisters and moms being murdered 10 years ago, they had to grow up sometime. What do you think happens when they grow up?